The dust kicked up around her worn boots as she stumbled into Placitas, New Mexico, one hand pressed against her swollen eye, the other clutching a small carpetbag that had seen better days. Teresa Grayson had rehearsed her story 100 times during the long walk from Santa Fe, each version sounding more convincing in her head. But as she stood at the edge of the small town in the summer of 1878, watching the curious faces turn toward her, the lies seemed to dissolve on her tongue like sugar in rain. Isaac Pierce was mending fence posts at the edge of his property when he first saw her. This slip of a woman who looked like she had been fighting with the devil himself and barely escaped. He set down his hammer slowly, watching as she swayed slightly in the afternoon heat, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat, that purple bruise spreading across her cheekbone like spilled ink on paper. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he had not experienced since his mother died 5 years ago, leaving him alone on this small ranch with nothing but cattle and memories. She noticed him watching and straightened her spine, trying to gather what remained of her dignity. Teresa was 22 years old and had learned early that showing weakness in this world meant inviting more pain. But the June sun was merciless, and she had not eaten since yesterday morning, and her head was swimming with exhaustion and fear, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she had put enough distance between herself and Marcus. "Madam," Isaac called out, his voice carrying across the dry earth. He was already walking toward her, his long legs covering the ground quickly. At 26, he had the weathered look of someone who had spent his entire life under the New Mexico sun, but his blue eyes held a kindness that made Teresa want to weep. "You look like you could use some water." "I fell," she said immediately, the lie tumbling out before she could stop it. "From my horse. Clumsy of me. I was traveling to meet my cousin in Albuquerque, but I think I took a wrong turn." The words felt thick and false in her mouth, and she could see from the way his expression did not change that he did not believe a single syllable. Isaac stopped a respectful distance away, near enough to help if she fainted, but far enough to not seem threatening. He had 3 sisters, all married now and living in different territories, and he recognized the specific kind of fear in her eyes. It was not fear of him, but fear of what might happen if someone found her. "That is a nasty fall," he said quietly, not challenging her story directly. "Why don't you come up to the house? My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, she makes a lemonade that could wake the dead." Teresa hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to keep moving, to not trust anyone, especially not a man. But her legs were trembling, and the sun seemed to be pressing down on her skull like a physical weight, and she found herself nodding. "Just for a moment," she whispered. "I do not want to be a burden." "No burden," Isaac said, and there was such simple honesty in his voice that Teresa felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built up over the past year starting to crumble. The ranch house was modest but clean, built from adobe with a wide porch that offered blessed shade. Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman in her 50s who had come west with her husband during the railroad boom, took one look at Teresa and immediately began fussing over her like a mother hen. Within minutes, Teresa found herself sitting at a worn kitchen table with a glass of cool lemonade in her hands and a damp cloth pressed gently against her eye. "You rest here," Mrs. Chen said firmly, her English accented but clear. "Mr. Isaac, he is good man. You are safe here, safe." The word seemed almost foreign to Teresa. She could not remember the last time she had felt truly safe. Certainly not in the past year since her father died and left her in the guardianship of Marcus Thornton, her father's business partner. Marcus, with his cold eyes and colder hands, who had decided that guardianship meant ownership. Isaac stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, watching the interplay with quiet attention. He could see the way Teresa flinched when Mrs. Chen moved too quickly, the way her eyes kept darting to the windows as if expecting someone to appear. "Mrs. Chen is right," he said softly. "Whatever you are running from, it cannot reach you here, not if you do not want it to." Teresa looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. He had a strong, honest face, with a straight nose and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was serious now. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, but they held his hat gently, carefully. "You do not even know me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know enough," Isaac replied. "I know that no woman gets a black eye like that from falling off a horse. I know that you are scared. And I know that my mother raised me to help people who need helping." He paused, then added, "I have got a spare room. Used to be my sister Margaret's before she married. It is yours for as long as you need it." The tears came then, hot and unexpected, sliding down Teresa's cheeks faster than she could wipe them away. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will for so long that this simple act of kindness, this offer of shelter from a stranger, completely undid her. "I cannot pay you," she managed to say between sobs. "I have almost nothing. Did I ask for payment?" Isaac said, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Chen, can you help Miss?" He paused, realizing he did not even know her name. "Grayson," Teresa whispered. "Teresa Grayson. Miss Grayson, to that room. I will bring in some fresh water for washing." Over the next few days, Teresa began to understand that Isaac Pierce was unlike any man she had ever known. He was patient and respectful, never pushing her to explain her circumstances, never demanding anything in return for his hospitality. He worked his ranch from sunup to sundown, tending to his small herd of cattle with the help of 2 ranch hands, Miguel and his son Carlos, who lived in a small house on the eastern edge of the property. Teresa, for her part, could not sit idle. Despite Mrs. Chen's protests, she began helping around the house, cooking and cleaning and tending to the vegetable garden that grew behind the kitchen. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose beyond simply surviving. And slowly, carefully, she began to relax, to let down some of the walls she had built around herself. It was on the 4th evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, that Isaac finally asked her directly, "Who did that to you, Teresa?" She had known the question was coming, had been expecting it, but it still made her stomach clench with fear. "My guardian," she said quietly, her hands twisting in her lap. "After my father died last year, I was left in the care of Marcus Thornton. He was my father's partner in a shipping business in Santa Fe. At first he seemed kind enough, but then—" She trailed off, unable to find the words. "He hurt you," Isaac said, his voice flat and hard. "He said I was ungrateful," Teresa continued, the words spilling out now that she had started. "He said he had every right to discipline me as he saw fit, and when I refused to marry him, when I said I would never consent, he became angry, very angry." Her hand unconsciously moved to her bruised eye. "This was not the first time he raised his hand to me, but it was the worst. And I knew if I stayed, it would only get worse, so I left in the middle of the night. I took what money I had saved and just started walking." Isaac was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this information. "Does he know where you went?" he asked finally. "I do not think so," Teresa said. "I told no one of my plans. I just knew I needed to get away, to find somewhere he would not think to look." She looked over at him, this kind cowboy who had taken her in without question. "You must think me terrible for lying to you about the horse." "I think you did what you needed to do to survive," Isaac said simply. "And I think you are braver than you know." He stood, stretching his long frame. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you like, Teresa. I will not let anyone hurt you again. You have my word on that." Something shifted in Teresa's heart at those words, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. She looked up at this tall cowboy with his honest eyes and gentle hands, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. It was too early to call it love, too soon to name the emotion that made her breath catch when he smiled at her, but it was there, a tiny seed planted in soil that had been barren for too long. The weeks passed in a rhythm that Teresa found deeply comforting. She would wake early, help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the household, then spend her mornings in the garden or helping with the washing. Isaac would come in for the midday meal, dusty and tired but always with a smile for her, always with some small observation about the day that made her laugh. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts. Teresa learned that Isaac had grown up on this ranch, that his father had died when he was 16, leaving him to run the place while his mother raised his 3 younger sisters. She learned that he loved horses more than cattle, but kept cattle because they were more profitable. She learned that he had been engaged once, to a girl named Sarah from Albuquerque, but she had broken it off when she realized how isolated ranch life was, how different from the social whirl of town living. Isaac learned that Teresa had been educated at a convent school in St. Louis, that she spoke French and could play the piano beautifully. He learned that she loved poetry, especially Wordsworth, and that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. He learned that she had a quick wit and a generous heart, and that when she laughed, really laughed, it sounded like music. But what neither of them spoke about, though it hung in the air between them like the heavy heat before a thunderstorm, was the growing attraction they felt for each other. It was there in the way Isaac's hand would linger on hers when he passed her the water pitcher at dinner. It was there in the way Teresa's eyes would follow him as he worked in the corral, admiring the strength of his shoulders, the competent way he handled the horses. It was there in the charged silence that would sometimes fall between them, full of things unsaid and feelings unacknowledged. It was Mrs. Chen who finally brought it up, cornering Teresa one afternoon while they were preserving tomatoes from the garden. "Mr. Isaac, he is good man," she said, not looking up from her work. "He care for you, I see it in his eyes." Teresa felt her cheeks flush. "He is just being kind," she protested weakly. "Taking in a stranger is the Christian thing to do." Mrs. Chen snorted, a decidedly unladylike sound. "I work for Mr. Isaac for 5 years. Never see him look at woman the way he look at you, not even that Sarah girl who broke his heart." She set down her knife and fixed Teresa with a knowing look. "Question is, how you feel about him?" Teresa opened her mouth to deflect, to change the subject, but found she could not lie to this woman who had been so kind to her. "I care for him," she admitted softly. "More than I should, perhaps. But I am afraid, Mrs. Chen. I am afraid that I am just grateful for his protection, that I am confusing gratitude with something deeper. And I am afraid of what Marcus might do if he found me here. I would not want to bring trouble to Isaac's door." "Love and gratitude, they are not same thing," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "You will know difference when time is right. As for trouble, Mr. Isaac is not afraid of trouble. He is strong man, brave man. He protect what is his." "But I am not his," Teresa whispered. "Mrs. Chen smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Not yet," she said, "but maybe soon." That night, unable to sleep, Teresa found herself standing on the porch, looking up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. The New Mexico sky was so different from St. Louis, so open and wide that it made her feel both infinitesimally small and somehow connected to something larger than herself. "Cannot sleep." Isaac's voice came from the doorway, making her jump slightly. He stepped out onto the porch, keeping a respectful distance. "Sorry, did not mean to startle you." "It is all right," Teresa said, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Isaac asked, then immediately added, "You do not have to tell me if you would rather not." Teresa was silent for a moment, gathering her courage. "About how strange life is," she said finally. 2 months ago, I was in Santa Fe, living in fear every single day, convinced that I would never escape Marcus's control. And now I am here in Placitas, standing under these stars, feeling more at peace than I have in years. It seems almost impossible." Isaac moved a little closer, close enough that she could see his face in the moonlight. "I am glad you came here," he said quietly. "I know the circumstances were terrible, but I cannot help being grateful that your path led you to my door." Teresa looked up at him, her heart hammering in her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Isaac said, and now he was very close indeed, "because I have not felt this alive in years. Because when I wake up in the morning, I find myself thinking about what might make you smile that day. Because when I see you in my house, in my life, it feels right in a way I cannot fully explain." He paused, then added, his voice rough with emotion, "Because I am falling in love with you, Teresa Grayson, and I think I have been since the moment I saw you standing in that dust, trying so hard to be brave." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes, but these were not tears of sadness or fear. "I was so afraid," she confessed. "Afraid that what I was feeling was not real, that it was just my heart seeking safety. But Isaac, when I am with you, I do not just feel safe. I feel alive. I feel like the person I was meant to be, before fear and Marcus and all the rest of it made me small and scared." "You were never small," Isaac said fiercely. "You walked away from a man who terrified you, walked into the desert with nothing but hope and determination. That is not small, Teresa. That is the bravest thing I have ever heard of." And then, because words seemed insufficient, Isaac did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his calloused hands, careful of the fading bruise on her cheek, and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, full of tenderness and promise, and Teresa felt something inside her finally, fully heal. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Teresa whispered, "I love you too, Isaac Pierce. I think I have loved you since you offered me water and did not demand explanations." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch at night. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Teresa felt truly, completely home, but their peace was not to last. 3 weeks later, on a hot August morning, a rider came into the yard. Miguel came running to the house, his face grave. "Mr. Isaac, there is a man here looking for a woman. He say his name is Marcus Thornton, and he is looking for his ward." Teresa went white as a sheet, her hand flying to her mouth. Isaac, who had been sitting at the table going over the ranch accounts, immediately stood and placed himself between Teresa and the door. "Stay inside," he said firmly. "Mrs. Chen, take Teresa to the back room. Do not come out until I say." "Isaac, no," Teresa said, her voice shaking. "He is dangerous. Please do not confront him." "I am not going to let him take you," Isaac said, his voice calm but absolutely certain. "Trust me, Teresa, please." Teresa nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "Mrs. Chen took her arm and led her quickly to the back bedroom, closing the door firmly behind them. Isaac walked out onto the porch to find a man in his 40s sitting atop a fine black horse, his clothes dusty from travel but expensive, his face set in lines of arrogance and entitlement. This, then, was Marcus Thornton. "Can I help you?" Isaac asked, his voice neutral. Marcus looked him over with barely concealed contempt. "I am looking for my ward, Teresa Grayson. I have reason to believe she may have come through this area. She is not well, suffers from delusions. She ran away from my home in Santa Fe nearly 2 months ago, and I have been searching for her ever since." "That is quite a story," Isaac said mildly, "but I have not seen anyone matching that description." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "She is 22 years old, dark hair, slim build. She would have been traveling alone, likely on foot. Surely someone as isolated as yourself would remember such a woman passing by." "I remember no one like that," Isaac said, his voice still calm but harder now. "Perhaps you should try in town." "I have already been to town," Marcus said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Several people mention that you sometimes take in travelers. I would like to search your property if you do not mind." "I do mind," Isaac said flatly. "This is my land and you have no authority here." Marcus's hand moved to his hip, where a pistol was holstered. "I am her legal guardian. I have every right to retrieve her and take her home where she belongs." "Guardianship ends at majority," Isaac said, his own hand now resting casually on his own gun belt. "And you said yourself she is 22. That makes her a grown woman, free to go where she pleases." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Marcus said, "If you are harboring her, you are interfering with my rights. I could have the sheriff involved." "Go ahead," Isaac said. "Sheriff Martinez is an old friend of my father's. I am sure he would be very interested to hear about how your ward came to have a black eye the size of a fist when she left your care. Assuming, of course, that such a woman exists." Marcus's face flushed an ugly red. "You know nothing about the situation," he said through gritted teeth. "Teresa is unstable, prone to wild stories and self-harm. That black eye was her own doing, and I have witnesses who will attest to it." "Then you should have no problem explaining it to the sheriff," Isaac said calmly. "Miguel, would you mind riding into town and asking Sheriff Martinez to come out here? Seems Mr. Thornton has some legal matters he would like to discuss." Marcus's horse shifted nervously, sensing its rider's agitation. "This is not over," he said coldly. "Teresa is mine by law, and I will have her back. Whatever lies she has told you, whatever sob story she has spun, it is all fabrication. She is a liar and a thief, and she belongs to me." "People do not belong to other people," Isaac said quietly. "Not anymore, not in this country. And I think you know that Teresa is neither a liar nor a thief. I think you know exactly what you did to her, and I think you are afraid that she has found the courage to tell someone the truth." For a moment, Isaac thought Marcus might actually draw his weapon. But then, perhaps calculating the odds or realizing that Miguel and Carlos were now both standing nearby with rifles in their hands, Marcus jerked his horse's head around. "I will be back," he promised. "With the law if necessary. Teresa belongs to me, and I will have what is mine." He spurred his horse and rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Isaac standing on the porch with his heart pounding and his hands shaking slightly with suppressed rage. Teresa emerged from the house a moment later, her face pale but composed. "He will not give up," she said quietly. "Marcus never gives up. He will find a way to force me back." "Then we will find a way to make sure that cannot happen," Isaac said firmly. He took her hands in his. "Teresa, I know this is sudden, and I know we have not known each other long, but I have a solution. It is not romantic, and it is not how I wanted to do this, but it is practical." Teresa looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean, marry me?" Isaac said simply. "If we are married, Marcus has no claim on you whatsoever. You would be my wife, under my protection, and there is nothing he could legally do about it." Teresa's breath caught. "Isaac, I cannot ask you to do that, to tie yourself to me just to protect me from Marcus." "You are not asking," Isaac pointed out. "I am offering. And yes, it would protect you from Marcus, but that is not the only reason I am asking." He squeezed her hands gently. "I love you, Teresa. I want to marry you because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, a real life, full of laughter and hard work and maybe, someday, children. So yes, marrying you would solve the immediate problem of Marcus, but it would also make me the happiest man in New Mexico." Teresa felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling through them. "You are sure," she whispered. "You truly want this?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," Isaac said. "Then yes," Teresa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Isaac Pierce, I will marry you. Not just because of Marcus, but because I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love someone." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher, who happened to be passing through Placitas. It was a simple ceremony held in the small church in town, with Mrs. Chen and Miguel and his family as witnesses. Teresa wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to Isaac's sister Margaret, and Isaac wore his best suit, somewhat threadbare but clean and pressed. Sheriff Martinez attended as well, his presence both a blessing and a warning to anyone who might consider challenging the union. Marcus did come back, exactly 1 week after the wedding, this time with a lawyer from Santa Fe. But the lawyer took one look at the marriage certificate, properly signed and witnessed, and informed Marcus that he had no legal recourse. Teresa was now Teresa Pierce, a married woman, and her husband had full legal authority over her person and property. The guardianship was dissolved by virtue of her marriage. Marcus was furious, but there was nothing he could do. He made threats, promised that this was not over, but in the end he rode away and they never saw him again. Later, they heard through the grapevine that he had left Santa Fe entirely, some scandal involving embezzled funds from the shipping company catching up with him. The news brought Teresa a sense of closure she had not expected. Marcus was gone, truly gone, and she was free. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Despite the love they shared, they were still learning each other's rhythms and habits, still navigating the intimacy of sharing not just a house but a life. There were awkward moments and small disagreements, as there are in any marriage. Teresa had to learn the demands of ranch life, the early mornings and the hard physical work. Isaac had to learn to share his space, his decisions, his life with another person after years of independence. But they learned together, and they learned with love. Isaac taught Teresa to ride properly, spending patient hours in the corral with her until she could sit a horse with confidence. Teresa taught Isaac to read poetry, sharing her love of words and rhythm until he began to see beauty in verses he had previously found incomprehensible. They worked side by side in the garden, planned the ranch's future over dinner, sat on the porch in the evenings and talked about their dreams. And slowly, steadily, the physical intimacy of their marriage deepened as well. Their wedding night had been gentle and somewhat awkward, both of them nervous and uncertain despite their love. But as the weeks passed, they learned each other's bodies with the same patience and care they brought to every other aspect of their relationship. Teresa, who had feared physical touch after Marcus's violence, discovered that intimacy could be tender and joyful. Isaac, who had only known the transactional encounters of his youth, discovered that making love with someone you truly loved was an entirely different experience. By their first Christmas together, Teresa was certain she was pregnant. She waited until Christmas morning to tell Isaac, presenting him with a tiny pair of knitted booties that Mrs. Chen had helped her make. Isaac stared at them for a long moment, not understanding, and then his eyes went wide. "Teresa," he breathed. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? We are going to have a baby," Teresa confirmed, laughing at the expression of pure joy on his face. "In June, the doctor thinks." Isaac whooped and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing and begging him to put her down. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Teresa suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and the summer heat made the later months uncomfortable. But Isaac was attentive and caring, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He brought her cool water when she was nauseated, rubbed her feet when they swelled, read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie in bed. Their son was born on a hot June night in 1879, exactly 1 year after Teresa had first arrived in Placitas. It was a long, difficult labor, and there were moments when Isaac, pacing outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Chen and the midwife attended Teresa, genuinely feared he might lose her. But Teresa was strong, stronger than she looked, and when the sun rose the next morning, she was holding a squalling, healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him James, after Isaac's father, and he was a colicky, demanding baby who seemed to never sleep. But neither Teresa nor Isaac minded the sleepless nights and constant attention. They were besotted with their son, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, the way he would grip Isaac's finger with surprising strength, the way he would quiet when Teresa sang to him. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Isaac expanded his herd, built new fencing, hired another hand to help with the increased workload. Teresa, when she was not chasing after their energetic son, started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in town, earning money that she insisted on putting aside for James's future education. They had more children as the years passed. A daughter, Mary, born in 1881, with Teresa's dark hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. Another son, Thomas, in 1883, quieter than his older brother but with a fierce determination that reminded Teresa of herself. And finally, another daughter, Catherine, in 1886, a surprise baby who came along when Teresa thought she was too old for more children. The ranch house, which had once seemed too large for just Isaac, was now filled with noise and laughter and the constant chaos of children. Dinner times were boisterous affairs, with everyone talking over each other, sharing the events of their day. Evenings were spent with Isaac reading aloud while Teresa sewed and the children played on the floor. Sundays meant church in town, followed by big family dinners with Miguel and his growing family, Mrs. Chen, and whoever else happened to be around. Through it all, Teresa and Isaac's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course. Isaac could be stubborn about ranch matters, insisting on doing things the way his father had done them, even when Teresa suggested more efficient methods. Teresa could be overprotective of the children, especially James, whom she sometimes still saw as that fragile newborn rather than the capable young man he was becoming. But they always talked things through, always came back to the love and respect that had brought them together in the first place. Isaac never raised his hand to Teresa or the children, never even raised his voice in anger. He was patient and kind, firm when he needed to be, but always fair. Teresa, in turn, created a home that was warm and welcoming, a place where Isaac could rest from the hard work of ranching, and the children could grow up feeling safe and loved. The years passed in the way years do, quickly and slowly all at once. James grew into a tall, serious young man with his father's love of horses and his mother's quick mind. At 18, he announced his intention to study veterinary medicine, and Teresa and Isaac, though they had hoped he might take over the ranch, supported his dream. Mary, at 16, was already breaking hearts in Placitas and the surrounding towns. Though she assured her parents she had no intention of marrying anytime soon. Thomas, at 14, showed every sign of becoming a rancher like his father, spending every free moment in the barn or out with the cattle. And Catherine, at 11, was still deciding who she wanted to be, trying on different dreams and ambitions like other girls tried on dresses. It was in the spring of 1897, with James home from his first year at veterinary school, and the whole family gathered for Sunday dinner, that Teresa looked around the table and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly took her breath away. 19 years ago, she had stumbled into Placitas with a black eye and a lie, running from a man who had tried to break her spirit. And now look at her life. Look at what she had built, what she and Isaac had created together. After dinner, as they often did, Teresa and Isaac walked out to the porch, leaving the children to handle the washing up. The New Mexico sunset was painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the air was finally cooling after the heat of the day. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "About how lucky I am," Teresa said softly. "About how different my life could have been if I had not found you that day." "I think I was the lucky one," Isaac said. "I was just existing before you came along, Teresa. Going through the motions of living but not really alive. You brought color and joy and purpose to my life. You gave me everything I have that matters." They stood there together, watching the sun set over the land they had worked together for nearly 2 decades, listening to the sounds of their children's laughter from inside the house. And Teresa thought about that terrified young woman who had arrived in Placitas so long ago, and she sent her a silent message across the years. It gets better. You survive, and more than that, you thrive. You find love and safety and a happiness you never thought possible. Hold on just a little longer because it is all waiting for you just around the corner. "I love you," she whispered to Isaac. "I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Teresa leaned into her husband's embrace and felt a peace so profound it seemed to settle into her very bones. She had found her home, not just in this place but in this man, in this life they had built together. And it was more, so much more, than she had ever dared to dream. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and sorrow, as all years do. Isaac's health began to decline in his late 60s, his joints stiffening with arthritis, his breath growing shorter with the passing seasons. Teresa, who was 4 years younger, cared for him with the same tenderness he had shown her all those years ago, rubbing liniment into his aching hands, making sure he did not overwork himself on the ranch. Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations by then, having married a sweet girl named Anna from Albuquerque and brought her home to the ranch. They lived in a new house Isaac had built on the western edge of the property, and they had given Isaac and Teresa 3 grandchildren so far, with another on the way. James had become a successful veterinarian in Santa Fe, married to a fellow student he had met in veterinary school, and they had 2 children. He visited as often as his practice allowed, and his expertise was frequently called upon by his father and brother when the ranch animals needed care. Mary had surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Placitas for the children of ranch workers and townspeople alike. She had married late, at 28, to a quiet schoolteacher from Colorado, and they had one daughter whom they were raising to be as independent and strong-minded as her mother. Catherine, the baby of the family, had inherited her mother's love of books and her father's business sense. She ran a small bookshop in Albuquerque and wrote a column for the local newspaper about literature and culture. She remained unmarried, declaring herself quite content with her independence and her work. On a cool evening in the autumn of 1903, Isaac and Teresa sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Isaac was in his rocking chair, a blanket over his legs despite the mildness of the evening. Teresa sat beside him, her hand in his, their fingers intertwined in the way they had been for 25 years of marriage. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Isaac asked, his voice rougher now than it had been in his youth but still warm with love. "When I told you I was falling in love with you. I remember every detail," Teresa said, smiling at the memory. "I was so afraid but also so hopeful. You made me believe that good men existed, Isaac. You made me believe in love again." "Best day of my life when you walked onto my land," Isaac said. "Well, second best. Best was marrying you," Teresa laughed. "You always were a romantic, even if you tried to hide it under all that practical cowboy exterior." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set. Then Isaac said, "Teresa, I want you to know that whatever comes, however much time I have left, I have lived a good life, a blessed life. You gave me that." "Do not talk like that," Teresa said, though she knew he was right to think about such things. He was 71 now, and while his mind was still sharp, his body was wearing out. "We have years yet." "Maybe," Isaac said, "and I will fight for every single one of them because every day with you is precious. But if I should go first, I want you to know that you should not mourn too long. You have always been so full of life, Teresa. Promise me you will keep living, really living, even if I am gone." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. "I promise," she whispered, "but you have to promise me the same. If I should go first, you keep living too, for the children and grandchildren. For the ranch, for the life we built together." "I promise," Isaac said, but in the end it was not illness that took Isaac. It was an accident, sudden and shocking, that left Teresa reeling. He was out checking fence line with Thomas on a cold morning in January 1904 when his horse spooked at a rattlesnake, despite the winter cold. Isaac fell badly, hitting his head on a rock. He never regained consciousness, dying 3 days later with Teresa holding his hand, and all their children gathered around his bed. The grief was overwhelming. Teresa felt as though she had lost not just her husband but a part of herself, the foundation upon which she had built her entire adult life. The ranch seemed empty without Isaac's presence, the mornings endless without his smile, the evenings unbearable without his companionship. But she had made him a promise, and Teresa Grayson Pierce had never been one to break her promises. So she grieved, deeply and truly, but she also kept living. She took comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the ranch that continued to thrive under Thomas's management, in the community she and Isaac had built in Placitas. She lived another 23 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1927 at the age of 71. By then, she had 9 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren, all of whom gathered for her funeral to celebrate a life well lived and a love that had endured. They buried her next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where they used to sit together and watch the sunsets. And if you had been there that day, standing among the mourners, you would have heard stories of a woman who had arrived in Placitas with nothing but a black eye and a lie, and a cowboy who had seen through the lie to the truth beneath, who had opened his door and his heart and changed both their lives forever. Their children told these stories to their own children and grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of a love that had started in fear and desperation, but had grown into something beautiful and enduring. The ranch remained in the Pierce family for generations, a testament to the life Isaac and Teresa had built together. The little house where they had raised their family, where they had laughed and loved and grown old together, became a cherished family landmark, preserved carefully by each successive generation. And on quiet summer evenings, when the New Mexico sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, some claimed they could still feel the presence of that love, still hear the echo of laughter and conversation from a porch where two people had once sat together and built a life out of hope and courage and unwavering devotion to each other. The black eye had long since faded, and the lie had been replaced with a truth more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. And in the end, that truth was simple. Love could heal, courage could save, and one moment of kindness from a stranger could change everything. Teresa had arrived broken and afraid, but she had found in Isaac Pierce a safe harbor, a true partner, and a love that lasted not just a lifetime but generations beyond.